Renewable energy is defined as any source of energy that can be used without depleting its reserves. In other words, it won't run out. Well, look around. The sun's shining, the wind's blowing, and the water's flowing. More energy than we could ever use is literally all around us, and we're just starting to learn how to harness it. The main sources of renewable energy are sunlight, wind, water, biomass, and geothermal. Nuclear power is not considered to be a renewable energy source because uranium, although not a fossil fuel, will eventually run out. Renewable energy sources offer a long-term solution to many of the problems with fossil fuels. They won't run out, they're more evenly distributed, they're less polluting, and they produce no net carbon emissions. For these reasons, the use of renewable energy is growing quickly worldwide and now makes up approximately 13% of total energy use and 19% of the production of electricity. In Australia, the figures are a bit lower at 6% of total energy use and 10.7% of the production of electricity. Let's now look at the technologies that harness renewable energy. Guess which industry is growing faster globally than the personal computer industry and almost as quickly as the cellular phone industry? The wind energy industry. Growth is especially strong in Europe. Denmark, for example, currently generates over 10% of its electricity from wind. In Australia, windmills have been used in remote areas and in agriculture for years, but wind turbines are now starting to appear on the landscape.
The Codrington Wind Farm was opened in July 2001 by Premier Steve Bracks, and when he opened it, it was Australia's largest and also Victoria's first wind farm. The wind farm size is 14 turbines and it supplies enough electricity to supply over 14,000 homes per annum. What are we talking about in terms of how it works? How does a wind farm work? Well, it's a very simple principle, really. The higher you go, the windier it is. So these wind generators tend to sit on towers roughly at least 50 to 70 metres high. And those towers weigh in the region of 50 to 60 tons and are made of steel. The blades, which capture the wind, they are fiberglass and they are on average around 30 metres in length, which is the equivalent to a wing of a jumbo jet. So that gives you a feel for the type of scale we're talking about here on the wind farms themselves. There are a number of factors that mark out what are the best locations for establishing a wind farm. Undoubtedly, the first one is that it has to be windy. What do we mean by windy? We mean a wind regime that is consistent and has sufficient strength. Well, having identified where you'd like to produce renewable energy through wind farms is how easy is it to get your goods, i.e. the electricity, to market. So that's the second factor. The third factor is that the local planning authority is disposed to having wind farms in their area. Now, we've found that the majority of local authorities do welcome this because it produces a significant amount of local investment. A wind farm project like Codrington has a large number of benefits, but there are also some drawbacks. But if I can start first of all with the benefits. The beauty of wind generation is that it produces zero emissions, so it is very much environmentally friendly. So it's not all pluses though, there are some disadvantages. The wind unfortunately doesn't blow to order. I'd like to be saying it would be blowing at 8 metres per second at 3:30 tomorrow afternoon, but unfortunately it doesn't operate on that basis. The real issue undoubtedly is visual amenity. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and to some people they look terrific, to others they look ugly. You're not going to please everybody all of the time, but I think the population decide basically, is the trade-off worth it?
The European Commission has set a target of 23.5% for the contribution of renewable energy to the total electricity production of Europe by 2010. and a large proportion of this is expected to come from wind energy. In Australia, wind energy only accounts for 0.05% of total electricity production, but due to the prevailing winds and a long coastline, Australia has a large wind energy resource by world standards. So it's estimated that over the next decade, 20% of the growth in renewable energy used for electricity production will come from wind energy. This water wheel may look simple, but if you imagine using similar principles with massive quantities of water, you start to see how water can be used as an energy source. If we look at the total use of renewable energy in Australia, we see that hydroelectric power accounts for 21%. In fact, large and small-scale hydro make up over 90% of renewable energy used for electricity production in Australia, and only around 8% comes from other sources.
We have 3 mini hydro projects at Glen Maggie, William Hovell, and also at Eildon, which is the Eildon Pondage Scheme, and we have a 30 megawatt project on the Ord River Scheme. In terms of the operation, hydro schemes tend to be either run-of-river or from the storage itself. Run-of-river means that the natural water course is not impeded in any way, and it is just diverted through a penstock into the hydro generation facility itself. That water is channeled through, so it turns the blades on the generator, so you're using the fall or the gravity of the water to turn the blades. That in turn turns the generator and produces the electricity. The main factors that determine what is the ideal location for a hydro project, and particularly a mini hydro project, is that you have an adequate supply of water, which provides the, if you like, the raw fuel source, which will drive the generator. So that has to be of consistent quantity and of consistent pace. Hydro projects, either mini hydro or large hydro, have significant environmental benefits because they are zero emissions. The economic factors are also often benefits because each one of these projects costs several million. Now that has implications for the local economy in terms of the use of suppliers and manufacturers and local contractors and employment opportunities during the construction phase. I think the limitations rather comes from 2 factors. The first being the lack of potential for these because there are no large sites available because they necessitate the building of dams. And as an organisation, for example, Pacific Hydro, as part of its value, said that it will not create dams for the use of hydro facilities because there are strong environmental lobbies all around the world on the creation of new dam facilities because of the potential devastation that wreaks upon the local environment. Given the availability of sites, it's very limited at the moment, so you have to quarry out literally the opportunities from using existing reticulation systems for the mini hydro scheme. So you're looking at existing water flows and how you might optimise these for hydro generation purposes.
It's important to understand that all energy production systems, including renewable systems, have environmental consequences. Because large-scale hydro schemes affect river flow and cause large areas to be flooded, further projects are unlikely in Australia. But existing projects in the Snowy Mountains and Tasmania can be made more efficient, and there's potential for the growth of mini hydro schemes. Hydro involves the use of fresh water, but what about the ocean? There's strong worldwide interest in developing technologies that harness the power of waves and tides and exploit the temperature difference between surface and subsurface tropical ocean water. Although there are wave energy demonstration plants at Port Kembla in New South Wales and Portland in Victoria, and a major tidal power project has been proposed for the Derby region in Western Australia, none of these technologies have been implemented on a large scale in Australia. If there's one resource that Australia has plenty of, it's sunlight. Although science has struggled in the past to develop cheap and efficient solar technologies, this is changing. In fact, some areas of solar technology, such as solar photovoltaic panels like these, are growing as quickly worldwide as wind energy. Solar energy contributes 1% of the total renewable energy used in Australia. Solar technologies are used a lot in remote areas, but they are also being increasingly used in urban areas.
Okay, well, we're looking over here at my house, which is a comfortable family home, which bit by bit we're turning into a sustainable house. In April 1996, it became the second grid-connected solar-powered house in Australia, and what that means is on the roof, as we can see, it's got photovoltaic or solar electricity panels. There's an array of about 2 kilowatts or 2,000 watts. There's altogether 24 panels, and they make electricity in the form of direct current that then is fed into an inverter that turns it into alternating current. Since the system has been operating, it's generated a surplus or a credit of over 2 years' worth of electricity. What that means is it's not only generated as much as we use in the house, but it's generated a whole lot more. Obviously, solar panels need to be in direct sunlight to work. So in the southern hemisphere, that means they need to be facing north. With the roof of our house, it's on an angle of about 30 degrees, which is coincidentally about the optimum angle in Melbourne. If you were to put up the same system today, there's now a rebate from the federal government which has cut the cost of the solar panel part of the system in half. You get a rebate of up to $7,500, and the same system today would cost about $16,000 to $17,000. But we've worked out that a system to meet our needs would cost around $12,000 to $13,000, and if we were to move house and had to borrow that money to put up a similar system, we'd be looking at around $15 a week, or the equivalent of a cup of coffee a day. So it's not something that's absolutely unaffordable, but it is maybe a big barrier for most people. Over the long term, they will pay for themselves because we're not paying an electricity bill. But we don't think about it just in terms of money. The solar panels are a really important part of us living sustainably. And from our point of view, we're actually buying not just electricity, but we're buying the premium source of green power, which is solar electricity generated on our roof.
Another important solar technology is solar thermal, which uses sunlight to generate heat. This is usually used to heat water, which saves the equivalent amount of electricity that would have been required to heat the water. So although they don't actually generate electricity, solar thermal hot water systems are included in graphs measuring electricity generated from renewable sources in Australia and make up 2.75%.
We've also got a solar water heater or solar hot water service, which is on the roof behind me. It was put up in November last year, and that one's pretty much brand new. Well, it has 2 panels that are facing north to get the sun, and they have a fluid in them that is in tubes, and the face of the panels is painted black and it's under glass. So during the day it gets really hot. The fluid in the panels heats up, and as it does, it rises to the top of the panels and transfers that heat into the tank. The tank holds 300 litres of water in the case of our system. Well, at this time of year in summer, we pretty much get all our hot water from the solar part of the system, but over the year it would average out to being about 2/3 of our hot water would come from the solar part, whereas in the cooler times of year in winter, or when we get a few overcast days in a row, the booster comes in, and in our case we've got a gas booster. You can also boost solar with electricity or with wood if you're in the country. Well, like the solar electricity panels, the solar hot water panels need to be in the sun and need to be facing north in the southern hemisphere. Because the back of our roof faces south, we've had to use a frame to elevate the panels so that they face north. They also need to be in an area that isn't shaded, and we've got a chimney that puts a bit of shade onto them, but they're still able to work despite that. The cost of our system was $3,700, and after we get a rebate from the state government of $1,000, it will cost about $2,700, which is maybe $1,500 more than a really efficient gas unit. So for a lot of people that's a huge barrier, but because we know the system is going to last 15 to 20 years, we know that it will pay for itself over time, and also it also has the environmental benefits that it's cutting greenhouse emissions and tapping into a renewable energy, the sun, and providing us with hot water every day. So it's well worth it.
With all this talk about solar and wind energy, we tend to overlook one crucial point. Almost 80% of the renewable energy used in Australia is biomass, which is any recent organic matter. Most of this is wood, used mainly for home heating, and bagasse, which is the term for sugarcane waste. But doesn't burning biomass, like wood, create greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide? Well, that's true. But if we also take into account the carbon dioxide absorbed by the tree as it grew, we see that there has been no net increase in carbon emissions. Biomass, such as methane from landfill and effluent, is increasingly being used to generate electricity. But to broaden our understanding of renewable energy beyond just electricity, let's look at the use of biomass in transport.
Venture has looked at alternative fuels over its 77-year history. We operate 200 buses, and during these 77 years we've looked at CNG, LPG, and even during the war period when there was a shortage of fuel, we're using charcoal. Venture is operating 3 buses at this stage of our 200 buses off ethanol, and the ethanol is made from a totally renewable fuel, which is coming from the sugarcane or the sugar processing process. And the ethanol is a little bit more corrosive than diesel fuel, but it's very much the same concept as a diesel fuel. So there's very little modification to the engine of the bus. There's several major benefits of running a bus off ethanol as opposed to diesel or LPG. The first one is that ethanol is totally renewable fuel, unlike diesel and LPGs, etc. The supply of ethanol is not a problem whatsoever, because there's so many household products that use ethanol, such as methylated spirits and hospital swabs. They even use the Japanese wine sake is made out of ethanol. One of the other major benefits of the using ethanol compared to diesel is that it's got 50% less greenhouse gas emissions compared to diesel, and it also has a lot less greenhouse gas emissions compared to CNG and LPG. Another benefit is that it blows a lot less fumes out of the exhaust compared to the diesel buses, and when you're operating 200 buses in metropolitan Melbourne, it's critical that we provide a real alternative to the motor car and have a vehicle that's running with minimal emissions and fumes coming out the back of the vehicle. There's a couple of minor limitations in running an ethanol bus compared to a conventional diesel bus, and one is that it costs marginally more to purchase the bus, probably about 5% more than your conventional bus. The second limitation is that although ethanol, the fuel itself, is a lot cheaper than diesel, you're using extra quantity, therefore the operating costs are slightly more than operating a conventional diesel bus. But this is a short-term issue because the price of diesel and LPG, fossil fuels, are going to go up substantially. The final limitation of using ethanol is that not many service stations are selling ethanol, therefore for long-haul vehicles, interstate trucks, etc., you can't use the product. Whereas in metropolitan Melbourne, such as our use here for buses, it's ideal. I mean, the buses are coming back into the depot every day. We've got the infrastructure there to fill the buses with ethanol. The future for Venture running all its buses off ethanol is exciting because we've replaced 10 buses per year, and I foresee that it won't be too long before all our buses are running off ethanol fuel.
In developing countries, traditional biomass like wood and animal dung accounts for over a third of primary energy consumption. Many developed countries also consider biomass to be a renewable resource with great potential. In Australia, biomass is expected to account for about half the increase in electricity production from renewable resources in the next decade. Ever been to a hot spring or geyser? These are examples of geothermal energy, which is heat energy originating deep within the Earth's core. When groundwater comes into contact with this heat energy, steam or hot water is forced to the Earth's surface. This is especially common in areas along the borders of tectonic plates, where geothermal activity is most concentrated. Geothermal energy can either be used directly for a variety of purposes, such as heating, or it can be converted into electricity. The United States government believes it will be possible for geothermal energy to provide 10% of its own non-transportation energy needs, and the energy needs of over 100 million people in developing countries by 2010. However, the only type of geothermal resource which is commercially viable at present is hydrothermal, where steam or hot water exists close to the Earth's surface. Since Australia lacks appropriate hydrothermal resources, our use of geothermal energy is not expected to grow until technology is developed to harness other forms of geothermal energy, such as hot, dry rocks. The federal government has introduced legislation to increase the share of renewable energy used for electricity production by 2 percentage points by 2010. This means that electricity retailers will be required to source more electricity from accredited renewable energy suppliers, and this will result in the increase of almost all the renewable energies we've discussed. And if you think you have no control over the electricity that comes through your power points, then think again. Most electricity retailers now offer their customers the opportunity to purchase green power, which comes from accredited renewable energy suppliers. Some examples of these programs include City Power's EcoPower and AGL's Green Energy. If you use green power, you can be sure whenever you turn on a light that the electricity you're using isn't going to run out, isn't making us dependent on other countries, isn't polluting the environment like fossil fuels, and isn't contributing to global warming. Renewable energy is defined as any source of energy that can be used without depleting its reserves. In other words, it won't run out. Well, look around. The sun's shining, the wind's blowing, and the water's flowing. More energy than we could ever use is literally all around us, and we're just starting to learn how to harness it. The main sources of renewable energy are sunlight, wind, water. For example, currently generates over 10% of its electricity from wind. In Australia, windmills have been used in remote areas and in agriculture for years, but wind turbines are now starting to appear on the landscape.
The Covington Wind Farm was opened in July 2001 by Premier Steve Bracks, and when he opened it, it was Australia's largest and also Victoria's first wind farm. The wind farm size is 14 turbines, and it supplies enough electricity to supply over 14,000 homes per annum. What are we talking about in terms of how it works? How does a wind farm work? Well, it's a very simple principle, really. The higher you go, the windier it is. So these wind generators tend to sit on towers roughly at least 50 to 70 metres high. And those towers weigh in the region of 50 to 60 tons and are made of steel. The blades, which capture the wind, they are fiberglass, and they are on average around 30 metres in length, which is the equivalent to a wing of a jumbo jet. So that gives you a feel for the type of scale we're talking about here on the wind farms themselves. There are a number of factors.
Total energy use and 19% of the production of electricity. In Australia, the figures are a bit lower at 6% of total energy use and 10.7% of the production of electricity. Let's now look at the technologies that harness renewable energy. Guess which industry is growing faster globally than the personal computer industry, and almost as quickly as the cellular phone industry? The wind energy industry. Growth is especially strong in Europe. Denmark, for example, biomass, and geothermal. Nuclear power is not considered to be a renewable energy source because uranium, although not a fossil fuel, will eventually run out. Renewable energy sources offer a long-term solution to many of the problems with fossil fuels. They won't run out, they're more evenly distributed, they're less polluting, and they produce no net carbon emissions. For these reasons, the use of renewable energy is growing quickly worldwide and now makes up approximately 13% of